all for coming.
Hi everyone, thank you for Raising the Bar for hosting me today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Ghana people, so I'd like to thank them for their custodianship of the land, both past and present into the future. Can everyone hear me okay? Just want to double check everyone's okay? Great. So, I'm going to ask a few questions and I invite you to put your hand up if this applies to you. So, hands up if you feel like you spend too much time on your smartphone or on the internet. Have a look around the room. All right. Second question. Who's found themselves mindlessly scrolling through short-form media content such as Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Reels? Hands up. See, a lot of people again. Okay, so who regrets the time that they've wasted doing things like doom scrolling or spending their time on their phone and so on and so forth? Yeah, again. If you want to make this a drinking game, go ahead. There's a few more questions going on. Okay, so onto the more deeper questions. Who feels like their ability to focus is getting worse? Who feels like their attention spans are getting shorter? Your hands up. Yeah. As I'm asking these questions, have a look around and see who else is saying yes. Okay, another thing. Who thinks digital technology and the time that they spend on their screens is hurting their brain function? Yeah. All right. Now, a different one. Who's tried to change their digital habits? So who's tried to change how they spend their time on their phone, smartphones? Okay, keep your hands up. Who's succeeded? Who did change their habits? Right, some people are like, yeah, a little bit. Who failed? Who went back to scrolling their phones and wasting time? All right. Okay, here's another one. Are there any parents or any teachers in the crowd? Yeah, any parents or teachers who's worried about the younger generation and how they're spending their time on their phones and their digital technology? All right. So I hope you noticed that as I asked all of these questions, I bet all of you answered at least yes to one of those questions, and if not, to all of them, right? So I want to point out first that this is a collective thing that we're all experiencing, that we're all feeling, it's kind of on everyone's minds right now, right? So even if this doesn't apply to you, I'm pretty sure most of this is relatable to you. You've at least heard about it, right? You've heard about this issue going on. So this is in the public discourse. So the word brain rot. So brain rot is internet slang that the kids use nowadays to describe how the more time that they spend on their phones and on their devices consuming meaningless content, the more they feel like their brain is rotting away. And brain rot was actually the Oxford Word of the Year for 2024. That's how prominent this issue is for a lot of the generations, getting a lot of buzz recently. So another way that you might have noticed this is that there are a lot of best-selling books on the topic right now. So one of the first books that sort of talked about this was called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr. Has anyone read this book, The Shallows? No? So this was one of the first books that sort of was the siren call that said there's a problem here. And this was actually released in around the 2010s. And then the most popular book of this kind of genre is Stolen Focus. Has anyone read this book? Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. This is a book by Johann Hari. This was New York Times bestseller, right? And sold many, many books. It's still on bookshelves. It frustrates me because I actually do not like this book very much. But I still, whenever I go to the airport or something and I look at the books that are there, Stolen Focus is always on the shelf there as one of the bestsellers. It's a very frustrating book. Do not recommend. I do not recommend. The most recent book on this topic was released just this year. It's called The Siren's Call, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource. And this was a book by Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes was an MSNBC anchor, and he left that job to kind of sell this book. And he wrote this book talking about how the attention is now an endangered resource. And so I just want to point this out because these were all New York Times bestsellers and in different years. So it's kind of been a repeated issue over time, I also want to note that all of these books were written by journalists, not scientists, and they were written by white men who maybe do not know as much as the scientists and the researchers who study this topic. So I'll talk a little bit about that more. So the narrative, this is what I want to focus on, the public narrative, is that it seems undeniable that digital technology is destroying our attention. It's destroying our cognition. That's the story. And it's undeniably true. That's how people talk about it. We say the internet is destroying brain function. We say it's harming our kids' ability to focus. And there's all these kind of narratives going on. It's all very negative, right? That the internet or digital technology is just destroying everything. What I want to convince you of today is that there's a few half-truths going on, and that I don't think we have the bigger picture. I don't think we have the complete picture. And I think it's really, really important that we do get the complete picture, that we get the details and we get the things right before we make mistakes and actually cause too much more problems with trying to intervene and cause other harms. So I'm going to talk about my expertise in this area and try and convince you that there's more that we need to know before you jump in and fall prey to some of the claims and the narrative that's being spun right now. So to give you a bit of background into myself, so if you didn't hear, I'm Dr. William Ngiam. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. So what I've done for the past years since getting my PhD in Sydney, going to Chicago to work as a postdoc and then coming back here to work as a lecturer in the School of Psychology, is to study attention. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. So what that means is I study how people take in information from the real world, process that information, store it in their minds. So this is what you might call attention or working memory. So I study how that works and how people do that. And I do this in a few ways. I create cognitive experiments. So I give people tasks to do and measure their attentional performance. I try and build mathematical models to describe how this performance is happening, to describe how people do attend to this information. I measure people's brain activities as they do this task. And I look for neural signals, brain signals, that tell me whether the person is attending or not, or how well they're attending, how well they can remember a thing versus not. And then I use machine learning models to try and decode what people are attending to using those brainwaves and using their behavior, using their performance. So that's kind of what I do in my research. I take, for example, EEG or fMRI. So EEG is when you put electrodes on the people's brain, on the surface, not inside their skull, outside their skull, and we can measure their brain waves that permeate through the skull. And that brain activity can tell us something about how people are concentrating. We can actually decode whether people are on task versus not, for example. We can also use MRI. So if you don't know, MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. It's what you might have done medically, where you get put in a scanner and you get slide in, and we can use magnetic resonance imaging to try and picture people's brain function, so their blood activity in their brains. And we can actually use that activity to try and infer whether people are attending or not. So that's a little bit of a flavor of what I do as attention. So I've been doing this for about a decade now. I got my PhD in 2019, so about that. And I've been doing research in this area, and I've published research in peer-reviewed journals and stuff like that. I'm happy to talk about later if you're interested. So let's start off with our first sort of segment, which is asking the question, what is attention? What is it? So if you ask a certain cognitive neuroscientist like myself, they might say attention is choosing the relevant information that's important to you, relevant to the task at hand. So choosing the information that you want to encode, that you want to store. And cognitive scientists would call this selective attention or directed attention. If you talk to a different cognitive neuroscientist, they might give you a different definition yet again. They might say attention is concentrating on a particular task, right? Trying to concentrate as long as you can and do your best at the task. And so we call that sustained attention or vigilance, right? So a different form of attention. If you ask a different cognitive neuroscientist again, they'll say, actually, attention is about splitting your cognitive resources across multiple sources of information, right? Trying to get as much information as you can from not just a singular source, but multiple sources. And that's called divided attention. Neuroscientists actually debate whether you can do this or not. Some neuroscientists believe you can only concentrate on one thing at a time. Other neuroscientists suggest that you can maybe get two things at a time, maybe. I think that you can only focus on one thing at a time. But you may be able to bounce your attention back and forth between two different things. So I'm in the middle somewhere. Cognitive scientists have also discovered many phenomena and effects to do with attention. So one of my favorite and one of the most replicable in psychology is inattentional blindness. If you've ever done a psychology degree or done a psychology course, you might have heard of a study called the Invisible Gorilla study. I highly recommend you do this at home. Search Invisible Gorilla. It kind of spoils this task, but you should be able to get it to work yourself anyway. In this video, you're asked to follow the number of people who pass a basketball between each other. There's one team that wears white and one team that wears black. You have to see how many times does the team in white pass the basketball to each other. I'm going to spoil that for you. As you do this, an invisible gorilla, a gorilla in black, moonwalks into the video, does a dance, and then walks off. And typically, most people don't notice. They miss it. And so we call this inattentional blindness. When you put your attention to something, you tend to miss things out of your attention, right? Inattentional blindness. I've spoiled that particular video, but if you look at it on YouTube, you'll find other things. Okay, do you have a question? No? So other things that we think about is attentional capture. So attentional capture is when you put a bright stimulus somewhere. So you put a bright light or you have something pop out, so something unique, that captures your attention, right? So for example, if you see a sea of green, but there's a red ball that rolls through the fields, your attention will be dragged to that red ball because it pops out. So we call this attentional capture. And then the last thing, we also have something called the attentional blink. So this is another kind of effects that we see where if I ask you to attend to a target, so I ask you, okay, you have to attend to a stream of things that are following each other, and then you have to look for a target. If I show you a second target, immediately after the first target, you miss it, right? Because it's presented too quickly, because the way our attention works is it's kind of phasing. You prepare to take in information, and once you've taken in important information, you're in this period where it's hard to get any more information. You've got to recover. So we call this an attentional blink. You've got to blink your attention before you take in more information. If I present things too fast to you, then you won't be able to take all of it in, right? So that's called the attentional blink. So the reason I'm telling you all of this stuff is that scientists, cognitive scientists, talk about attention in many, many different ways with many, many different effects. There's so many things to think about when you think about attention. Attention is multifaceted, it's complex. And unfortunately, I don't think the narrative that I started off with digital technology captures that nuance, that captures that complexity of what attention is. And even scientists still debate what it is. There's a famous two set of papers in our field. One argues we don't know what attention is, and another side of the papers argues we know what attention is. People are still debating the definition. People are still arguing whether attention exists or not, or whether it's a useful construct. So this is all just to say attention is very complex. It's hard for us to understand. It's hard for us to know.
Is that paper on Seek?
Yeah, it should be. Actually, if you're interested in anything that I'm talking about, I have business cards here, and I'm going to start a blog that kind of brings the information. I'll get to why I'm doing this as well. Was there a question here?
Yeah, just a quick thing in my head. What's the difference between attention and focus? Or are they essentially exactly the same?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, is there a difference between attention and focus? Most scientists, let's say cognitive scientists, would put focus under the guise of vigilance. So that's one type of attention, what we might call sustained attention. But cognitive scientists are interested in many, many different types of attention that go beyond focus. Me personally, so I study something called working memory. So I study what contents of information is stored in your mind, what we might call the focus of attention. We might also call this your mind's eye or the spotlight in your head. What are you attending to in your head internally? Scientists also love giving names. That's also known as internal attention. My point here is to bombard you and tell you, overload information, and to tell you that there's lots of different types of attention. There's a lot of complexity and factors that are involved in attention, right? Okay. So my issue here is that the articles that you see about attention are typically one note. Your attention spans are getting worse, right? Internet is destroying your attention spans, right? Your attention is getting ruined by notifications, right? It's always this one note, and it's always saying your attention spans are getting worse. I want to reassure all of you that you are more than your attention spans. There's more to you than just your attention spans, okay? So I'm going to read you some articles, some famous articles on this topic, popular science articles. This is from Time magazine, pretty reputable. You now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. Right? That's a very famous title. Famously, goldfish have an 8-second attention span, right? And so this article argued that ours is worse than 8 seconds. I can guarantee you it's better than 8 seconds, right? You're all okay. You're doing better than a goldfish. This is from Vogue Australia. Your attention span has never been worse. What can we do to get it back? I'm sure most of you, if you spent any time on any social media or any content, have read article titles like this. Like, your attention span is getting worse. They're putting the claim right in the title because most people aren't reading past the title nowadays. But they're saying that attention is worse and it's getting destroyed. And here's how to fix it, right? Or here's what others are doing, or here's what others are saying. And I have a really, really big issue with this because I think it drives this narrative that our attention spans are getting worse without the evidence or research behind it, and without this nuance and complexity that I had already just talked to you about, right? There's more to attention than just your attention spans. So what do we know? What do we know? Yes? Yes? Yes, so that I agree with you. So the point I'm trying to invoke is that when popular writers write about attention, is that they don't think about when attention is useful, right? So one of the research projects that I am working on with my colleagues at the School of Psychology at the University of Adelaide. So this is with Dr. Carly Stagg, Dr. Natasha Van Antwerpen, and Dr. Elo Moek. Is we did a qualitative study. We took 2,000 posts and comments that Redditors have made about this very topic. So what we did was we went to subreddits where they talk about this. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what Reddit is, it's an internet forum where people can post to specific communities that they've made, sub-communities. So people find each other on the internet and they discuss a particular topic. And we found 4 sub-communities that talk about this topic. They're called No Surf, Digital Minimalism, Dumb Phones, and Dopamine Detoxing. And I'm going to talk about these 4. So what I did, so all you need to know is that it's an internet forum where people talk about this stuff. And so we scraped 2,000 posts and comments that were made in recent times. And we wanted to ask the question, what are people saying about this? Like, what are people reporting? Is it that they're experiencing? What are they feeling? So, as I mentioned, a lot of the articles are one note. They're saying your attention spans are getting worse, your attention spans are getting worse. What we observe, or what we find in these reports, is a whole host of impacts, a whole variety of impacts. These, as I list these out, these might resonate with you, and I'm hoping that they do. What we see is a fracturing of attention, what we're calling a fracturing of attention. People constantly feel like they have the need to multitask. They need to do multiple things at once. It's an intrinsic feeling that they should be working on multiple things at once. they report that they get distracted a lot, especially from notifications and emails. That comes up a lot. So for those of you who are working, getting distracted from the task at hand, from notifications from things like social media, emails, and so on and so forth. A lot of people also talk about information overload nowadays, that there's so much information to digest, that there's this overload and that they just are overwhelmed and can't sift through the noise. And so there's like a mental clutter. There's a mental clutter that they have to handle, and that's impacting their attention. Another thing that they're reporting is the regret about wasted time that I asked you at the start of this talk. Like the regrets that they have on spending time on meaningless content. So another internet term that the kids are using these days is brain slop, to talk about how the content online is just unproductive and unhelpful. So brain slop. So a lot of the posts and comments that we looked at are reporting that they're regretting wasting time on contents that are meaningless, that have no productive value to them. A lot of them also talk about the addictive nature of content. Who feels like they're addicted to the internet content that they're seeing, right? There's some rewarding element to what you're experiencing, so you get addicted. So a lot of people use addictive language. So they use that language to describe how they're feeling. Like, I'm addicted. When I go away from these devices, I feel withdrawal, right? So they use this kind of language to describe the effects that they're experiencing. And so naturally they think the reason that they're experiencing this stuff is due to addiction. Another element that they're talking about is brain rot, which I actually mentioned, and dopamine. Dopamine is very, very prevalent in the narrative. Everyone talks about dopamine. Now I'll go into that into a bit more detail later. The last one that I think the older gentleman was alluding to was that these people, they struggle to read. They struggle to, they find it really hard and effortful to read. And some of these users, they report saying, I could read so many books previously. Like, it was easy for me to consume books, but nowadays I find it really hard to read a book and to focus. They really find it hard to focus on the task at hand as well. So that's what people are reporting from this study. The reason I point out this, the results of this qualitative study is that, again, the narrative shouldn't be so one note. People are experiencing these effects of digital technology in a very heterogeneous way, in a multifaceted, complex way. It really does a disservice to these people to just say, your attention span is getting worse, right? What we should be addressing is the multifaceted nature of the effects that they're experiencing. And if we think about that for a little bit, the nuance in that, maybe we can provide personalized solutions or ways that can help people if we better understand what they're actually experiencing, rather than simply saying, your attention spans are getting worse, right? So that's the hope here. And outside of qualitative research, we can obviously do quantitative research, which is when we measure and put a numeric to a numeral or value to people's attention. We usually do this with attentional performance tasks or things like that. And the research there is also mixed, partly because our measures of attention tend to be indirect. So one of the prominent researchers in this field is Dr. Gloria Mark. She's a professor at UC Irvine. She's a human-computer interactions researcher. So what she does is she researches how people interact with technology, and she's been doing this for decades. One of her measures is to see how often you switch between tasks and switch between windows on your computer as you're doing your work. In the 90s, this used to be about 2.5 minutes. You would spend 2.5 minutes on a window before you switch to a different window. She reports that nowadays it's about 45 seconds. 45 seconds before you switch. And she's used this piece of evidence to argue that our attention spans are getting worse. But I don't see it this way. I actually see it differently. I think people are getting more efficient with how they're using digital technology. For those of you who work with computers or screens, how many of you work with multiple windows open at once, right? So naturally, those metrics that try and measure your attention spans through this way are going to be different, are going to be impacted because now people are used to working with multiple screens, right? So Dr. Gloria Mark is actually mostly on point with what she says. I think she's a great resource, incredible. But I want to highlight that the ways we measure attention are starting to get outdated. They don't really reflect the modern way that we use our attention or use digital technology. We need to catch up, right? And so the evidence is kind of mixed in this regard. There are other pieces of evidence that I'm really confident about. So one that is replicated a few times is called the mere presence effect. And that is when, if you have a smartphone just near you, your attentional performance gets worse. It doesn't have to be anything to do with your task. You don't have to be using it for your work. If it's just there on the table, cognitive scientists reliably see a small decrement in your attentional performance. So the way we do this is we ask people to perform an attentional task. This is known as the sustained attention task. And what we do is, it's usually a very boring task. So it's difficult to attend. So you really have to concentrate to do this task. Typically, the researchers allow the person to have their phone on them or take it away. And it's such a reliable effect, they've coined the term the mere presence effect, right? So the idea is that, you don't even have to be doing anything, but the smartphone device is distracting. So there are other measures of attention that we also don't think about. And one that I want to point out is video games and movies. So as I just told you, people don't use attention spans. People use window switching to measure attention. Another part of this narrative and this debate, especially to do with kids, is video games. And I'm sure a lot of people think that video games are bad. They're demonized. That we shouldn't have our kids play video games, right? But it's weird from a cognitive scientist standpoint, because these kids or whoever spend a lot of time focused on those video games. They can focus for hours, right? This doesn't seem to be a problem with their attention span. It's a huge contradiction, right? They can play games for ages, right? They're happy to, right? So is that an attention span problem? So here's some other news. If you're not a fan of video games, that's okay. Movies are actually getting longer on average. It's a surprising fact. Movies are getting longer. Think Barbie and Oppenheimer, 3-hour movies. Movies weren't 3 hours, a few years ago, right? So movies on average are actually getting longer. And I'm sure if you sat in a movie, you should go support the movies, by the way. If you go to the cinemas and watch, I think you're fine. You're entranced by the movies. Your attention spans aren't, you are attending, right? You're okay. So another thing, I want to return back to the video games. Cognitive scientists generally find video gamers have very good attention. That people who play video games quite a lot, it depends on the type of video game, but their attention is actually very good. You can imagine these games require you to encode a lot of information quickly to make decisions, right? Like in a game, let's say if you're playing a shooting game, you've got to look at the environment and figure out what's new, what's coming. And you have to be sampling from the screen very quickly to get the information you need to make a decision. And actually, so what we find is video gamers typically have very good attention spans. They're very good at efficiently encoding the information, rather than the other way around. But if you listen to the popular media, if you're familiar with the person Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book The Anxious Generation, he's been going hard after video games. He's been saying video games are the problem, but the empirical evidence actually suggests video games can be helpful. And this is one of the things that I want to touch on, is that these effects aren't so homogeneous, that they vary between how they affect different people. And that's often a nuance that's missed in the literature and in the narrative. So another thing that I want to point out that is implicit in the narrative is something that scientists call the dose-response relationship. So what the dose-response relationship is simple. It's the stronger the dose, the larger the effect, right? The stronger the dose, the larger the effect. And people have implicitly assumed that this is true of digital technology. So for example, the more hours you spend on screens, the larger the impact on your cognition, right? That's the relationship, the dose-response relationship. Now, if this was true, if this has been happening over the past 20 years, our attention span should be in a crater right now. We should not be able to focus at all, right? So this is an implicit assumption that people have, and it's not actually been backed by the evidence. There's no real truth to this as far as we can tell right now. What we do is we look at the amounts that people attend to digital technology, that use their phones and their screen times, and we split them between low users and heavy users. And when we look at the differences, they're inconsistent in the field. If this was true, we should see the heavy digital technology users have the biggest effects, right? We should see the lowest attention spans. But we don't typically see this. We see a mixture of results. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's actually better. So the dose-response relationship is actually not the part that we're worried about. It's not really about how much you use it. And I'm going to propose that it's about how we use it. So I'm going to talk about that later. Yes. Another part of this problem is that we also don't have a lot of research following people. And I don't mean that in a creepy way. I mean that we need to do longitudinal studies, right? So one of the things that we don't do a lot of is track how people use their technology over time. Think about school-based studies. We usually only get the kids for a little bit, like once in the semester or once per term, and that's it. We can only track them for a little bit. So there's a real lack of this research looking at how these effects move over time or change over time. So, it might seem like I don't believe anything is going on, but I want to reassure you, as you saw when you put all of your hands up at the start of the question, I really do believe something is going on. I do think digital technology is having an impact on our cognition and on our attention. But I just don't think we have the finer details, and I'm going to suggest that those finer details are really, really important, that we really, really need to know what those are. So one of the reasons why I'm concerned is that, as I mentioned, those articles which tell you your attention span is getting worse, they try and tell you a fix, right? They try and tell you a fix. And I'm really worried about that. A lot of these articles are generally harmless. There'll be personal anecdotes. So they'll say, I tried this, you should try this too. That's mostly harmless. I think it's mostly harmless, right? The ones I'm worried about are the ones that are trying to take advantage of people who are vulnerable and who believe truly that they need a fix to this, right? To this problem of digital technology. The book that I didn't like from before, Stolen Focus, this is one of those examples. In the book, Stolen Focus, Johan Hari, the journalist, he decides to take a whole month off. He goes to a remote place called Provincetown in Massachusetts, gets rid of his phone, gets rid of internet access, does that for a month, and then his book is like, I did this for a month, I saved my attention, and now I'm going to tell you the answers and the solutions, right? He's selling the book, right? But how many of you have the luxury of going away for a month to some remote town and unplugging everything? It's just not feasible and not reasonable, and I truly don't think it rescued his attention. So that's what I'm worried about, that people are going to sell you stuff, right? So one thing that I've seen a lot of is training courses that are called brain hacks, even though they have nothing to do with brains, but it sounds good and it's alluring, right? They'll sell you brain hacks and they'll say, if you follow this 8-week course, buy my 8-week course and your attention span will be better, right? I'm sure some of you have seen articles like this or YouTube channels that are trying to promise you to recover your attention, which I think is very interesting. The other concern I'm worried about is drug interventions, pharmacological interventions. So there's a class of drugs called nootropics, and these are the ones that promise brain function, a better brain function. And frankly, the evidence for these nootropics is not there. But these people will say, the reason that your attention spans are poor is due to your brain, something to do with your brain. And we can fix the thing about your brain by selling you this drug that does something to your brain, right? And frankly, there's no good evidence for this. And I'm going to talk a bit about this more, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience around attention, the attention in the brain. So quick check-in, who here has heard of brain rot? Yeah, and who here has heard of dopamine detoxing or dopamine fasting? Okay, cool. In the articles and in the public discourse around this topic, you'll hear terms like neuroplasticity thrown out. Your brain is neuroplastic. It's always changing, so therefore you need to take care of it. It's true, you do need to take care of it, but not necessarily because of neuroplasticity. The other one I hear is dopamine. And dopamine is going to be the one that I'm going to focus on. We saw this in our qualitative research. We saw Redditors use this kind of language. So they use brain-based language to explain what's happening to them. So we see them say, scrolling through short-form content provides me with dopamine hits. And because I get dopamine hits, I get addicted. And so I need to figure out a way to fix my dopamine, right? Fix my dopamine. Those are quote verbatim from what we've seen in the Reddit posts, right? And if I cast your mind back a little bit, articles have said this about different things. So currently the discussions around short-form content, before it was about notifications. Suddenly the narrative has shifted from talking about how notifications are ruining your dopamine and your brain to how short-form content is ruining your brain, right? So just want to point out that the narrative has been changing over time, right? Subtly in different ways. But it's used this brain language or this dopamine language. And scientists have actually done research on how neuroscientific explanations are very alluring, are very seductive. So it's a very famous paper in our field called The Seductive Allure of Neuroscientific Explanations. The idea here is the researchers who did this study basically put an image of a brain on an explanation, and the image of the brain had nothing to do with the actual thing that was being explained, had nothing to do with the article. And despite it had nothing to do with the article, people rated that explanation as better, right? Even though it had nothing to do with it. So neuroscience and biological explanations have this power of being like alluring, being convincing. And so, trust me, I'm not trying to use that knowledge against you right now. I'm trying to shed light on it, right? That it's very easy to be convinced by something like this if you don't know the finer details, right? I won't name my most disliked podcast, but I'm sure you've heard of famous neuroscientists hawking a lot of pharmacological interventions in their own podcasts, and their name rhymes with Tuberman. So I want to focus on, a lot is said about dopamine and dopamine detoxing or fasting. So what do we know about dopamine? So dopamine is famously the reward neurotransmitter. People talk about this all the time. Dopamine is linked to reward. So it's a neurotransmitter linked to reward. And it's actually, I think it's a very good connection to digital technology. Think about the infinite scroll on your phone, right? The scroll on your phone, you don't know what's coming next. And so as you scroll up, you get a new piece of content, and sometimes that new piece of content is rewarding. Psychologists call that variable reward structures. Variable reward structures tend to stick longer than constant reward structures, right? So that's one part of it. And the second part of it is the novelty. Dopamine has been shown to react to novelty in the brain. So our brains want to search for new information most of the time. It's actually adaptive. It's evolutionary to look for new pieces of information. And so what we see is that neuroscientists have shown that in deep brain structures, so your brain is not just one mush. It's got cortical structures, so towards your skull, and deep inside, within that cortex, is your deep brain structures, which have a higher cluster of neurons. It's like more things firing. And it's usually, we think, you doing more of the complex stuff and the brain control and that kind of stuff. So in these structures, so I'm going to name a few. So these deep brain structures like the striatum and the basal ganglia, which are deep in here, they have a lot of dopaminergic neurons, a lot of neurons that react to dopamine. The highest that captured everyone's attention. That was the highest concentration of dopamine neurons are in those structures. Okay, but I think people don't realize that there's many types of dopamine neurons. There's 5 types of dopamine receptors, and we class those receptors into 2 classes: D1-like and D2-like. D1 and D2 were the first 2 dopamine receptors that we discovered, and then we found out the other ones were similar to those. And these D1, D2 receptors actually do different things, more or less, right? So they have, one of them sort of is the excitatory kind of pathways in your brain, and one is more inhibitory. You can think about it like that. But that's the point, is dopamine has multiple roles in the brain. And it's not just those brain structures. These brain structures form networks with other parts of the brain. So your basal ganglia, your striatum, reach out forward to your prefrontal cortex, and that's where we think the control is happening, cognitive control. So there's connections with other parts of the brain going on. So what studies have shown, this is a classic paper from actually quite a while ago. What we find is that if we put someone in a scanner, an fMRI scanner that I explained before, and ask them to do multitasking, so you have to focus on 2 tasks at once, we see that the deep brain structures that I just mentioned, the striatum and the basal ganglia, they light up. They are very active during multitasking. However, when we ask subjects to focus on one task and to do it very well, that structure doesn't get activated, right? It's usually the frontal cortex that gets activated then. My point is that multitasking seems to activate those reward structures, those structures that we think are important, right? Multitasking does this because of novelty and reward. So what I'm saying is that there is a half-truth to this. I think dopamine is sort of the right place to be looking at, but it doesn't tell us the whole story because there are multiple types of dopamine receptors. And then also dopamine is involved in more than just one thing. It's not just about your attention. Dopamine is involved in motivation, wanting a reward. It's involved in learning, how quickly you learn something. It's also involved in motor actions, how you move your body. Famously, Parkinson's disease, with tremors, is implicated with the dopaminergic system, right? Degradation in the dopaminergic system is what scientists think is causing part of the Parkinson's disease symptoms, right? So it's not just attention or cognition, it impacts other things as well, like motivation, learning, and motor movement. So another thing about dopamine is that we don't all have the same dopamine sort of reaction. There are genetic differences and individual differences in how sensitive you are to dopamine. So some interventions related to dopamine will have more of an impact on you if you have specific genetic levels or precursors compared to others, right? So again, there's that complexity to this story that, again, is not captured by these narratives around dopamine detoxing. When we see dopamine detoxing or dopamine fasting, there's like, the Redditors and people on the internet, when they talk about this, say, I have to try and rid dopamine from my body. I have to rid dopamine from my brain. It would be really, really bad if dopamine was removed from your brain. It would be very, very catastrophic. You don't want to just remove all of your neurotransmitters from the brain. That would be very, very bad. I want to point you to an idea that is, I think, useful. This one's a little bit pseudoscience-y, but I think there's some truth to it. The cognitive reserve. So I don't think neuroscientists haven't located where in the brain the cognitive reserve is, but it's a pretty good concept to help you help you explain some stuff. The cognitive reserve is this idea that you can build up cognition over your lifetime to protect you from neurodegenerative effects. We see this in aging. So if you do crosswords a lot and puzzles, if you exercise a lot, or to a point where you're healthy, if you have a job that is intellectually stimulating, these build up reserves that seem to protect you from the harsher neurodegenerative diseases. So it's a theory, it's the theory of cognitive reserve. So these are kind of things that you can consider taking away with doing more of those kind of things to try and protect you from these impacts. But I just want to point out, losing all dopamine would be bad. So we don't want to necessarily go to pharmacological interventions, drugs to do with dopamine right away. That is not the solution, I think. And these half-truths are kind of dangerous. So I think the dopamine detox is kind of right in its essence. What you do want to do is fix how your habits are rewarded, right? You should be taking stock of what you find rewarding. You should be taking stock of how you're spending your time, right? You should be doing those things and making sure that you're happy with your habits, that you're happy with how you're spending your time. So for example, if you feel like you're wasting your time on your phone at home, you should reflect on that and reconsider, what do you want to spend your time on? And one of the solutions that we find commonly reported in our qualitative study that seems to work and has also been reflected in some reports is finding an alternative activity that you care about. So rather than spending time on your phone, spend time doing the thing you like. Some people like to do exercises. So once they've replaced that habit with exercising, they no longer spend their time on their phone, they get the benefits. They get the positive benefits that come with exercise. So thinking about switching and reflecting on how you spend your time is really important. So back to my original point where I'm worried about the claims and the concerns being taken too far and it convincing you, like people saying, something's wrong with your brain, something's wrong with dopamine, like go fix it. And inducing panic is that people are vulnerable. And we've already seen this. So people are selling these dopamine fasts or dopamine detoxes. And we've actually seen cases where people take it too far and they think, I'm going to remove any rewarding stimulus from my life. So they'll say, I'm going to not talk to anyone because talking to someone may be potentially rewarding. I'm not going to eat because food is a potentially rewarding stimulus. And I'm not going to do anything like that. So I hope you all agree that this is an extreme and not a healthy thing to do. It actually causes more harm. And I think this harm is directly caused by this myth or these claims about dopamine that are pushed on in the narrative, right? So we have to be careful about this. My point here is that there's also a large research gap in this area. We don't have the answers quite yet. We need to do a little bit more to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Can I ask you to dabble in two new areas? Two new areas. One is situational awareness. Somebody stepping out of a shop, not living where you're going, and running the because they brain somewhere else. So you're not going to know what's going on around.
Yes.
Very low survival value.
Sure.
The other thing is solution strategies. People who spend a lot of time thinking things through, having a lot of experiences, they develop suites of solution strategies for solving life problems.
Yes.
Very, very valuable, but most people don't do that.
So I agree. I think one of the things that I need to clarify about attention is that you don't always want maximum attention all the time. So here you're saying that you don't want to, you want to have attention to your surroundings as well as you're doing something. So I think a lot of people have this idea that they can unlock their brain. This is another popular movie myth. You can use 97, like you only use 3% of your brain, and then suddenly if you use 100% of your brain, you're going to be super powerful and omnipotent and whatever. We use more than 3% of your brain, using most of your brain all the time. That's just a random myth that someone reported at some point. And also about attention, you don't necessarily want your attention to the maximum all of the time. That would be very energy consuming. You actually want to have, it's actually phasic. Sometimes you want to have high attention, sometimes you want to have the low attention, right? You can't just maintain it at high speeds all the time. And the reason that's important here is that there's a balance that we need to strike. One of the symptoms of ADHD is hyperfocus, being too focused on the thing, right? Your attention can go extreme one way versus attention not having any of it, right? So it's trying to find an optimal balance in attention. And I think that's another myth that we've got to kind of bust. So another thing is, so there's a large research gap on what works for whom. And I think that's a really important part, for whom. What I'm really worried about as a scientist is all of us being reduced to an aggregate statistic, right? You hear this about kids all the time. Kids in schools have improved their well-being by 2%. Is that all kids, or is that just a subset of kids, or just one kid? So I'm worried about this a lot, that we're all being reduced down to a statistic. I think it's important to figure out the nuances here. For whom are the interventions really important? So for example, there's a study in Melbourne by Hannah Kirk et al., emerging researcher. She did an intervention study into kids, and these kids had diagnosed ADHD. And what she did was a 5-week intensive training on their attention spans. And the reason I bring this study up was that it was successful. It helped their attention performance. What it did not do was alleviate their ADHD problems, right? It improved their attention spans, but not the problems, right? So it's not just about solving the one thing as well. It's about looking at what's happening holistically, what's happening around in the environment, all the other impacts. Is it attention that we're trying to fix, or is it the parenting that we're trying to fix, how we parent the kids? Or is it the education system? Is that what we're trying to fix? So there's more to this going on than just attention spans. All right, I'm on to my last section. Digital technology is rapidly changing. We've seen in recent years that the internet has embraced short form content, and part of our qualitative study shows people wishing for the internet of the 90s, going back to a time where the internet was better in the 90s, you know. We've seen in recent changes that it's people are pushing short form content as the thing now, when that was not true a few years ago. The other massive change that I couldn't avoid not talking about is AI, right? Generative AI, ChatGPT and all this stuff has now become a common use in the internet and digital technology. And I'm really worried about this. It's rapidly evolving and it could have really big changes on our cognition. We don't know yet, right? But what I'm saying is that digital technology is rapidly evolving and scientists can't keep up, right? We can't keep up. I alluded to this before, but the problem wasn't short form content for a while. The problem was notifications for a while, right? So the story has already shifted in the past decade or so. And I just want to point out that this is an issue that's come up in history. It started with the radio and the TV first. Like people were like, oh, the TV is going to destroy your attention spans. It's also been seen in the radio. And in a very comical version of this, in the 1700s, in the late 1700s, there was a similar issue. I'll tell you the story first and I'll tell you what caused it. One person, there's written proof of this, one person was like, oh, the social fabric of our society is going to get ruined, right? No one's going to talk to each other anymore, right? This invention is going to stop us from talking to each other. Can anyone guess what this is? It was the invention of the stove, the iron stove, because it replaced fireplaces. It replaced fires. Because now when people could cook on iron stoves, their argument was people will no longer talk to each other because there's no fireplaces to talk around, right? So I'm just saying this is a repeated element that has happened in history, right? So be conscious of that. The idea is technology has changed over time, right? And implicit in that relationship is that technology is improving us. And I want to be careful here because I actually am concerned that this narrative is potentially bending the other way. That technology may no longer be helping us, but be actually overall harming us. The ratio of good to bad may have flipped, right? So we have to be careful. I'm also not saying that we should become Luddites and get rid of all technology. I'm just saying we need to really reflect and criticize what's happening with our digital technology. All right, I'm going to skip that. One of the other things that we struggle with is we can't measure how digital technology is being used. It's very difficult to measure. If I asked you how you are using your digital technology, I bet all of you would have a different answer. It's so heterogeneous. And researchers can't keep up. We can't measure it in time. In fact, I have a colleague, her name, she's not here today actually, but she's been trying to run a study on kids, asking kids about their social media use. So if there's any parents who are parents of 14 to 17-year-olds, please talk to me afterwards. There's a study that I'd like you to do. I'll give you the information. But this is part of, I wanted to spruik this because it's part of the problem. Researchers can't get this data, can't get this information. Who holds this data? Typically the digital technology companies and not the researchers. And the digital technology companies wall off their data. It's preventing researchers from getting to it. Or if they let you take their data, they say, but I have to look at what your results are before I let them see the public, right? They have control. So what I wanted to end my talk with is a bit of a call to action. Is that your scientists need help. If you've noticed in Australia, so one thing I want to point out, the government is also having trouble defining social media. As of a few days ago, the government added YouTube to social media, and people are pissed. They don't know what's going on. The government doesn't know what social media are on, but they're initiating a social media ban for anyone under 16 at the end of this year, right? And to researchers like us, we think that's a very blunt intervention, and that they haven't captured what might happen, and they haven't captured how that ban might affect different people and different kids. And so that's why my colleague is doing research on how people are using their social media and wanting to get that data first so that we can be ready for when the social media ban goes in place and actually prepare interventions and research and help and interventions. So the scientists are trying to help, but we really need your help. We're not being supported right now. The The current research funding budget is 0.49% of the GDP. It's the lowest it's been in about 3 decades. So there's just it's dwindling. So scientists need resources and need funding to help do this important research to try and help bring positive change to society, such as the work I'm trying to do, which is trying to measure how people use digital technology, measure how people's brains are when they're using digital technology, have actual objective performance-based measures of attention, triangulate those 3 so that I can tell you what's going on. But I need the support. So I'm an early career researcher. I don't have any government research funding. Fingers crossed, I put a grant in, I hope I get it. But I have no control over that. The pool is so small that it's hard for these researchers to do this really important work. I hope you agree, this important work. So here's what I hope. I hope that because this is my time to shine, because now there's focus on this issue, that this can happen. What I also want to point out is that we should build coalitions. So scientists, I know we've been called a nerdy bunch and a geeky bunch and we don't know how to socialize. Come hang out with us and talk to us, form coalitions with us. We need to hear from you and you can help us out. So one of the ways you can help us out is get in touch with the School of Psychology, help do our studies, contribute to our studies, or if you're a parent or teacher group, let them know about that. We want to talk to them and we want to share our research and our insights and help out, right? If we can form more coalitions, we can form a bigger bit of public pressure to try and get the money where it should be, which is to us, I think, in part. All right, so that's all I wanted to share. Because I noticed that this topic is in the media a lot, and it's very hard nowadays with a lot of misinformation on the internet and so on and so forth. It's very hard to find credible pieces of information. Now that you've met me, I hope you kind of have gotten to know me a little bit better and think I'm a little bit credible, a little bit reliable. So what I've done is I've started a blog, a Substack. It's free. If anyone who knows me, that I'm an open scholarship scientist. I tend to put everything transparent and open. Here, I'm hoping to start this Substack to try and build a mailing list, build this coalition I'm talking about, and also to get you those insights from research that I see and read, and to get them to you, and to hear your conversation, to send me your emails and things like that. So I have a business card, I'll hand that out later. But yeah, that's all I have for this. So thanks for listening.